Hello and welcome to the Carle Illinois College of Medicine Fall Webinar Series. Today our topic is how Carle Illinois prepares you for the USMLE Step 1 exam. My name is Rob Wallen. I'm the Academic Skills Specialist here at Carle Illinois.
My name is Jaya Yod. I'm the co-course director for the Step 1 course, which is called Phase 1 Synthesis and Summary.
Hi, and I'm Will Pluta, the Director of Curriculum at Carle Illinois College of Medicine.
We are displaying an agenda of the breakdown of today's webinar. Very briefly, I'm going to give a little bit of context for the Step 1 exam that I think is important to help set the stage. Then we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about how you would be prepared for Step 1 at Carle Illinois, and we budgeted plenty of time for your questions. So just a few brief points to give some context for Step 1. Step 1 is a standardized exam, which you all are very familiar with. You can think back to SATs and ACTs for college admission. You all are familiar with MCATs, which is something that you need to get into med school. And then you don't often hear right away about all these other standardized exams that are part of your med school journey. But really there's a series of 3 steps, and Step 2 even includes multiple exams. But by and large, I think there's a lot of conversation around this Step 1, this first one, that it's an especially high stakes exam. So given that there's a lot of conversation around it, I was wondering if you're able to use the chat feature. I was wondering if you can make a guess and try typing into the chat box. It might be listed as ask a question. I can't quite see what your interface looks like, but somewhere where you can type in a response. See if you can respond to this question. I want you to guess what percentage of first-time test takers of Step 1 pass the exam? What do you think? And we'll give a minute or so for people to get some responses in. What percentage of first-time test takers of Step 1 do you think pass it? I'm glancing around, I'm seeing 40%, 85%, 90%. Another 95%, 90%. Okay, it's good to see that the chat feature is working. Later on, we'll take advantage of the question and answer feature. The number is, need a drum roll sound effect, 96%. There are a lot of you who are pretty close with that 95 guess. And so that's a pretty high number. 96% of first-time test takers, this is based on 2017 data, pass it. Isn't that sort of surprising why this test has such a high stakes reputation, and yet there's a large portion of people who pass it? A little bit more information that I think can shed some light on this phenomenon. The scores are in a 1 to 300 range, and it's a scaled score, so it's not like the number of items that you necessarily get right. Based on this last set of data, the average score was a 229, and there was a standard deviation of 20, and the score you needed to pass was a 194. And so by and large, the majority of people pass. But why all of the tension? Why all of the concern? I think this next slide helps answer that question. So let me orient you to the graphic that you're looking at here. Along the horizontal x-axis, you see a list of different specialties. Along your y-axis, you see a list of different Step 1 scores. And what you see with each of these bars for each specialty, in blue was folks who matched to that specialty, and in green was folks who did not match to that specialty. The little horizontal tick mark was the median score. This vertical line is the interquartile range. So the bottom is the first quartile and the top is the third quartile. And what you see By what I've highlighted here for two specialties of family medicine and interventional radiology is that depending on the specialty, there's different typical ranges for these step 1 scores. So I think part of our answer here is that your step 1 score is a factor that's looked at in making residency match decisions. It's one common data point that folks have on all applicants. And that's why it's used as part of what's used in admissions decisions for residency programs and matching. But a point that I wanted to make with this, which would hopefully put you at ease, if we take a look at, for example, emergency medicine that I've highlighted here, you see significant overlap in the bars for people who matched and who didn't match. And keep in mind that this is still just the interquartile range. So there's still people who scored below this about 221 that we're looking at in the blue line here, who still matched to this specialty. And that's meant to put you at ease and to highlight that there's other factors that are looked at, just as in an admission decision for med school. Your MCAT score is important, of course, but there's other factors that are considered as well. Depending on specialty, some factors might weigh more heavily than others. You'll notice in some of these, if you glance at vascular surgery, there isn't as much of an overlap. So you can weigh the relative importance of a particular score range there. But if you look at some of the other specialties, you see significant overlap as well. And so with that context, which is meant to hopefully put you at ease a little bit about step 1 scores, the next portion of this webinar will focus on all of the ways that Carle Illinois prepares you to perform well and to meet your goals for step 1.
Thanks, Rob. In my portion of the presentation, I'm going to cover some of the key features of the curriculum that will get you ready for step 1. Last September, I made a presentation that covered an overview of the entire curriculum, and I'd encourage you to go see a talk that I gave called Medical Education Through the Lens of Engineering, a look at the Carle curriculum. This is posted on the Carle Illinois admissions webpage. It's also posted on the Carle Illinois YouTube channel. You can be the 78th viewer of that video. So, in my brief overview of the curriculum through the lens of step 1, I'm going to emphasize overall curriculum alignment with step 1, and 2, how our assessment system building up to step 1 promotes learning of step 1 content. But I think an important part to think through is that the work that you put in is probably the most important part of performing well on step 1. Another important part of our curriculum is our 307 right now faculty members who know about step 1, know about how important it is, and care about you and will want to see you succeed on that exam. So, looking at the curriculum, on the screen right now, you have the overall curriculum map for phase 1 of our curriculum. This is the instructional time that occurs before step 1. Some key features here. First, we are an organ systems, single pass organ systems based curriculum. What that means is that we're organized around organ systems such as cardiovascular, respiratory, renal, neuroscience. And that is a setup in which the basic science curriculum is integrated. So for example, anatomy, physiology, pharmacology are integrated into these courses. This is a setup that's been found to promote student learning of both medical science content so that it makes you a better physician, and to promote learning of step 1 content. Now, it's critical to think about what our guiding principles are in designing the curriculum and putting the curriculum together and evaluating the curriculum. So first, when we look at the curriculum, we work with our expert faculty who know what you need to know to be a great physician. And that guides most of our instructional decisions. Second, we use consensus reports on what students need to know to be successful physicians. Third, we've engaged in some peer review from external institutions to make sure that our curriculum is preparing students that enroll here to be great doctors. And then finally, we do take into account the Step 1 program, and we are aware of it. All of our course directors are aware of it, and understand that that's an important set of content that you need to learn. So be confident that that integration is there. Going back to our curriculum map, another core feature of our curriculum that's pretty critical is that we are a case-based curriculum. And that case-based curriculum provides a clinical context for understanding medical knowledge that is on Step 1. You're going to be more likely to remember content that's on Step 1 if you can connect it to a patient, whether it's a paper patient or a live patient. Along those same lines, we have the very early clinical exposure starting in the first couple weeks, where you'll be meeting patients, working with patients, both in our physical diagnosis course and our clinical integration course. So again, you have these very robust experiences with patients that will help your Step 1 knowledge stick to realistic cases. Given that Step 1 has a relatively increasing clinical focus, that's going to support your learning of Step 1 content. We'll spend some time, you'll see on this diagram that there is a course called Step 1 Review. Jaya will be telling you a little bit about some of the details there, but that's also a critical component of our Step 1 program. Finally, we have discovery elective opportunities, in particular in the second year, which can give you some flexibility if you need extra time to prepare for Step 1, or have some specific goals related to Step 1 that you need to address. Could you turn the slide? So I mentioned earlier that we do use Step 1 outlines to guide our decision-making about the course, and we're pretty systematic about this. This is an example of our mapping between Step 1 content and just critical content that we want you to know to be good physicians, and how we've engaged in this process of looking back and forth between what is going to be covered in this course, what is going to be covered in this case, what is going to be covered in this lecture, and what do you need to know to be successful both as a physician and on Step 1. So we've taken great care in this area throughout. Now, moving on to the assessment system, we've taken into account what we know from the cognitive psychology about how people learn and how we've developed the overall assessment system. Both Rob and I, for example, have training in educational psychology and cognitive psychology that has guided the development of the assessment system, as well as a number of other members of our faculty. So one key part of our assessment exams is the use of progress exams across the curriculum. So we have 5 progress exams before Step 1. These progress exams utilize the National Board of Medical Examiners' customized assessment system. It utilizes retired Step 1 questions, and another advantage of this system is that it provides performance profile on how you compare to your peers, and also provides the educational leadership team with additional information on how our students are progressing compared to the national population of Step 1 takers. One of the advantages of this is that you will have real Step 1 questions as a core assessment tool across the instructional program. Further, another advantage is that these exams are cumulative. So we really try to promote this environment where you're not just cramming for an exam at the end of a course. I'm going to finish the renal course and I'm going to cram, and then because I've moved into the next course, neuroscience, I've forgotten it. No, we have these progress exams that encourage you to learn and think about how I'm going to have to know this content for the long run. Everyone intends to do that when they go into medical school, but this exam system supports that. Another core component of our assessment system are weekly assessments. There's a couple different kinds. So our weekly assessments are centered on our learning objectives for each week. We have a couple different formats. First are 2-phase assessments in which students will take an individual exam at the beginning of a session, or individual quiz at the beginning of a session, And then after they've completed the individual component, they will work with their peers in a small group to review their answers. So you get immediate feedback on your progress, and you get immediate teaching from your peers on how to perform. And if this class as a whole performs poorly, the faculty member running the session can provide immediate feedback on how the class is progressing. One of the nice components of this two-phase format is that we know from educational research, one of the best teachers are near peers that understand the content just a little bit better than you do. This close understanding of just working through the problem helps address expert biases. Another issue, another component of this assessment system is the use of weekly online assessments. So most weeks we have a weekly assessment tool utilizing typically step 1 type questions, and students are expected to complete this weekly quiz that provides immediate feedback on how you're doing. So you know where your strengths and weaknesses are. 2, it provides the curriculum team and the course directors with immediate information on how you're performing. So if we need to discuss your study strategies, we can do that. We can also make changes to the curriculum if we need to, or make minor modifications if we're seeing a weakness across the entire class. And finally, it gives you just more exposure to testing, because we know that testing is one of the best ways to promote deep learning. I think those are my issues related to the curriculum.
Great, and I saw a question that came through that I'll answer in the next slide. In terms of assessment, some of these weekly assessments are administered online through a platform called Firecracker. I want to mention that as a commitment to self-assessment, enabling self-assessment for students, we also currently use a product called Firecracker that allows you to mark certain topics. So in the image that you see on the screen now, you'll see a topic is listed that says thorax, and it can be marked urgent, current, past, or unmarked. And as those topics are marked, the system will pull review questions on that particular topic. Now, some of these questions function in a flashcard-like way. That was one of the questions that came through. Is there prep materials for flashcards and study guides? And as you can see from this very brief screenshot, you can see that that is a pretty typical format for how these topics are reviewed within Firecracker. One thing that is part of this system, and that's a little bit different than a straight-up flashcard system, is what you see on the right side of the image that asks you to rate how well you knew that topic. And if you rate it lower, the algorithm takes that into consideration in presenting you that material at more frequent intervals throughout your review process. So it's something you could eventually mark as higher and you wouldn't see as often. Now, another component of the self-assessment system that I wanted to highlight with this third image is a case question. And as part of the Firecracker platform, there's access to case questions, which are the closest thing to the USMLE format that you'll be able to have access to in this platform. So it's very feasible that in your first week of studies, you can have access to practice the type of question format where things are situated in clinical settings, and you'll be able to practice those early and often in ways that will support your learning throughout the curriculum. Another tool that I wanted to mention is a question bank. The school is providing access to students 6 months before the scheduled Step 1 exam to a question bank. Here you see images, a screenshot from UWorld. There's many similar features across different question banks. In this particular one, you see the image that allows you to select particular subjects and to select a number of questions that you would want for yourself. And the benefit of this kind of question bank system over just a normal kind of progress exam is that it also allows you to review answers, and there's explanations contained within that review of answers as well. The other image that you see on the side here, as part of this platform, there's access to some practice exams that will actually give you a projected score. And that's a way that you can monitor your progress towards your goal and towards a target score. You also see a number of subcategories that are highlighted, as well as an estimate of where you currently stand within that category, which can help you make decisions on how to spend your time during more intensive review times on particular topics. I also want to mention the extensive resources that our library has. Here you're looking at an image that is a screen capture of what's called a live guide. Peg Burnett, our librarian, is responsible for curating these live guides on various topics. One of the topics that you see displayed here is your USMLE review. And you see some thumbnails for some books. I laugh at some of the titles, Step 1 Secrets, as if there's a bunch of secrets and you just need to learn the secrets and then you'll do well. These are actually great books when you look through them. And there's e-versions that are available as well as physical copies. Sometimes there's nothing like still just having a physical copy of a book in your hands as well. And if there's resources that you would want access to but don't see currently available through the library, Peg, our librarian, would be happy to work with you and see if those are resources that can be added to the collection as well. Now, if you're looking at your screen and you're seeing double, no need to adjust your monitors. Another resource that I wanted to mention / shamelessly plug is me, your friendly neighborhood academic skills specialist, where my #1 responsibility is to support students with their learning strategies and their Step 1 preparation plans. The bulk of my work is done in one-on-one individual consultations that students can set up at any point. Something that I recommend for students who know early on that they are shooting for a high Step 1 score is to have a conversation with me early about that. There's recommendations I have if you're really aiming for a high score, then of course that's going to take more work and starting early. But for the majority of students, I think that at a little bit later in phase 1 is a good time to meet with me. I have it as a goal to meet with everyone before you start in the dedicated Step 1 course, which you'll hear more about in just a moment. I want to highlight some of the other resources that I provide and help manage. I do some workshops for large groups as well on study skills and Step 1 preparation. Go through other resources that you might decide to use. There's no shortage of resources, that's for sure. I provide summaries of some of those resources, and I also help facilitate a peer tutoring program where other medical students can guide you. Say if in review using a question bank, you identified a content area that you needed some extra assistance with, then you can speak to a tutor about getting some additional assistance in that content area. Well, at this time, I want to turn it over to Jaya to tell you a little bit more about one of the largest ways that the Carle Illinois institution helps prepare you for Step 1.
Hi, my name is Jaya Yod. I'm one of the course directors for this course called Phase 1 Synthesis and Summary. And this is being taught in, my other course director is shown here on the picture. His name is Atif Jalil. He's a MD, I'm a PhD. And together we're going to be running this course, which you might recall from the outline that Dr. Pluto put up of the curriculum, is a 4-week course at the end of the pre-clerkship phase. And the purpose of this course, it's twofold. One is for the curriculum review of the Phase 1 curriculum. And the second is obviously for preparation for the USMLE Step 1 exam. So I will just turn it over to the next slide. If you can go to the next slide. You want to do that?
Yes.
Do you want to? Okay. So this slide outlines the 5 elements of this course that we are focusing on. And of course, our goal is to have everybody pass this step one on their first attempt. And the 5 elements of the course are, they're not necessarily listed in order, but this is what we're trying to achieve. So the first element is to determine student readiness. And the way we're going to do this is we have ongoing student progress portfolios, and they are accumulation of all your weekly assessments during the course. They are have your weekly assessments. They have your 5 progress exams that Dr. Pluta mentioned, which are your NBME customized exam results. And so we have these portfolios that we're using to determine student readiness. And so we will have a really good idea of how each student is doing in our curriculum. The second element of our curriculum is to provide supplemental content. So this is going to be done by not only myself and Dr. Jalil, but all the faculty, the thread directors that are responsible for making sure that different threads like anatomy, biochemistry, all that coverage is happening throughout the curriculum. Our faculty, both our clinical and our basic science faculty, and that includes all of our course directors, they will be providing supplemental content it's high yield content, high yield review, practice sessions, practice question sessions. And the formats can be lecture formats, they can be webinars, they can be team learning. And the goal of providing the supplemental content is to address gaps and weak areas for the students that have been identified through this ongoing assessment during phase 1. So the goal of providing the supplemental content is to address those gaps and weak areas for the students, and to improve the scores for the students and understanding of the content for the students. The third element of this course is test simulation. And what we're going to do is we're going to have, we already mentioned the regularly scheduled customized NBME exams, the progress exams, but we will also administer a comprehensive basic science examination that's a proctored exam administered during the step 1 course period. So that is a formal USMLE style proctored exam, and that will be used also for determining student readiness, in addition to all of the elements I mentioned in the student progress portfolios. So the test simulation is a formal USMLE style proctored exam. The fourth element of this course is coaching, and we will use some high yield question bank to follow student progress and give targeted feedback to the students during their preparation using this high yield question bank. And the fifth element is wellness. And wellness means that we are going to be regularly checking in, having the students check in with us. We will check in with you. We will make sure that you're on track. We will also provide wellness assessment, wellness activities for the students. So we want to make sure that your overall well-being is addressed during this time, which is a high stress period. So those are the 5 elements of the course, and then again, remember that's at the end of the entire phase 1 curriculum. And after that, if you are deemed ready to take it, you will take the step 1 USMLE exam. So at this point, I will close, and I'm happy to take questions along with Dr. Pluta and Dr. Wallen at this point.
Right, so you should be able to type in questions to the question and answer feature. And I had several of those come through earlier when we tested out the response system. There's also the chat window, which we're able to view as well. So I think that you can add a question in either space, and we will get to them as soon as we see some questions rolling in. You're welcome. Several people saying thank you for the information about the specifics.
So one of the first questions that have come in, do you screen students prior to step one and will not permit students to take the test if you find them unready? We do keep track of your performance, obviously through the progress exams and the weekly quizzes. So we generally have a pretty good sense of how well students are performing. And if we think that there's any danger in a student not doing well, not passing, we would probably, I don't know if we can actually stop someone from taking step one, but we would strongly discourage you from taking it if it looks like you're not ready to take it. Often what we find is that we screen students and we're like, you've done just about everything that you can possibly do to be prepared for step one. I know that you're still a little bit nervous about it, but have to take this exam. It is time.
Here's another question that I saw come through that I think I can speak to. Someone asked, can you talk about how the current students feel about step one at the moment? And a couple of things I want to mention. So when I speak with students one-on-one, I see the whole spectrum from students who had only briefly heard about it, and I provided a lot of initial information, to students who are already targeting a specific score range that they were trying to achieve. So I think it's a pretty typical response that there's some anxiety for some students, more for some students and a lot less for other students. I think something else in speaking with students is that sometimes the messaging can be unclear. When talking to a student who said that she was reviewing some topics in first aid, and she said as an aside, I know you don't like me using that, and I wanted to put a pause on the conversation and say, well, actually, I recommend students use it early as something to reference, but not necessarily as a primary learning resource. There's other textbooks and other resources that should be consulted as a primary learning source. But I think all the way throughout the curriculum, it's a good thing to keep step one in mind and to keep tabs on how what you're learning lines up with step one, so that you'd identify topics that really align with what you're currently learning in the PBL process, and then other topics you might have to spend a little bit more time on yourself. The other comment I wanted to make here is that we recently had a Thrive Wellness Wednesday speaker who is a current practicing physician at Carle, the hospital group that's partnered with us. And he was someone who had gone through PBL curriculum as well. So I think that put a lot of students at ease to see someone who is in a specialty that he really wanted to get into. He went through the PBL curriculum and he did just fine on step one as well.
Yeah, do you want to say a little, I mean, you covered a lot of the resources, so you might want to review some of those key concepts again.
Yeah, the question was, do you provide resources for students such as study books or online resources? So one of the big resources that's provided to students is access to a question bank that will most likely be UWorld 6 months prior to starting to taking the exam. So that's one of the biggest resources. Other books such as First Aid or Step One Secrets are available through the library. Some are available as digital electronic copies. Some there's physical copies as well. So I think that answers the firecracker resource, which is used as part of the weekly assessment system, is also a resource for step one preparation as well. So there's no shortage of resources that are provided to students. And I think one of the biggest challenges actually for students is not having enough resources, but actually sometimes the temptation is to look and see your classmate is using such and such resource. It can be really tempting to run after each and every resource, but at a certain point, there's too many to use effectively, and it makes a better decision most likely to choose fewer resources and to use them in a higher quality way.
So the next question I'd like to address is, can you go over the weekly assignments that were mentioned earlier and how those work? There are a couple different assessments and assignments that are more closely aligned with step one prep, although our ultimate goal is to make sure you're in an excellent position. As many of you, or I hope all of you know, we are a new school, and we started out with the framework that we would have a weekly quiz that would guide students studying and provide us with immediate feedback on how students were doing within the curriculum. The way that those worked, and I think this is becoming more common, was that the quiz would be released on Friday afternoon, and students would have until 5 o'clock on Sunday to complete the quiz in their own time. Quizzes typically have somewhere between 15 and 20 items. We utilize pre-written questions that look like step one questions in most cases. We've also integrated some engineering content aligned with our engineering mission. But generally, high quality questions that students were supposed to complete over the weekend or on Friday afternoon, depending on how they prepare for each week and how they prepare to study at the end of each week. So that's one core assessment system. Now, as we've been developing and making minor modifications based on student feedback, we have been encouraging course directors for courses that are being updated for the next year, as well as for courses that haven't happened yet, to have something called a two-phase assessment. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier in my talk, but instead of having a weekly quiz, we've given some course directors the option to have an assessment where the students come in likely on a Friday, but could be any day, and the students take the quiz, and then there is an opportunity to get immediate feedback on their performance on that weekly quiz, and then talk about their answers, whether right or wrong, with both their peers as well as with the course director or any other faculty member who is leading the assessment session. So those are our two step one aligned weekly activities related to step one.
There's a question I can address over here that asks, is there formal time set aside for student study groups for step one? While all the mentioned tools are fantastic, this person feels that it can provide a lot of confidence for students when they study in groups and encourage each other. So students spend quite a bit of formal time together in groups, in their PBL groups, and other groups for physical diagnosis, the pod structure. There's a number of other times that they're assembled in groups. What I found is that students, some students especially, have already formed their own sorts of study groups. And I anticipate that later on down the line, they'll probably focus on step one review and prep a little bit more often, but certainly encourage groups coming together. I've actually suggested the one book with the title that I've left at Step One Secrets. I think it's actually a great format for groups to take because of the way it provides some clinical scenarios. And you actually talk through explanations more than just selecting a right answer in a multiple choice format. So there isn't that formal time for smaller study groups where you're forced to do that. I'd certainly encourage groups of students to informally get together and do that. During the step one course, some of the structure for that will encourage students to, I think, do that group preparation as well.
Real quick, the feedback that they get on Firecracker is immediate, correct? Yes, the feedback that you get from the weekly quizzes when it's done in this weekend format is immediate. Do you find that clinical exposure helps students perform well on step one? Well, at Carle Illinois, within our curriculum, we have not had any students take step one yet, so we do not have firsthand experience with that. Mm-hmm. There is an emerging research literature, and I've been at some of these schools that have done this, that have begun to move step one later in the curriculum and after a substantial clinical period. If you summarize that evidence, which is starting to come out in educational journals, but I've seen at medical education conferences, is that the clinical exposure certainly does not, or certainly does promote some understanding of the content. Where you put the step 1 exam, whether you put it after a clerkship period, doesn't have a big impact on your scores or students' scores.
Here's maybe another one you would like to address, Dr. Pluta. What happens if someone does not pass on their first try?
Well, that won't happen. But if that does, one of the nice things about our overall curriculum is that there is some time to engage in additional study and engage with additional resources. I didn't show this on my slide because of time, but we have significant elective time built into the major clinical year that follows the step 1 time period. So if a student unfortunately did not do well on step 1, which can happen for a variety of reasons, bad day, not feeling well, unfortunate noise while you're trying to study or take the exam, we would most likely take you out of the clerkship. Although if you're far enough along and we got your results, we'd let you complete that clerkship. And then we would move you into the elective period, and you would utilize that time to develop a more focused study plan to address any weaknesses that you were aware of, and you'd most likely work with Rob on that kind of remediation plan. So that's generally what would happen, is that we would be able to do that. And one of the nice things is that would keep you on track for graduating on time. And we have that flexibility given the elective time, so you wouldn't feel like you're totally out of cycle.
I saw a question in here I'll go ahead and address. I thought, yeah, this was a great question. It is, how are you addressing learning and studying methods to those with engineering backgrounds? As an engineer myself, studying for the MCAT has been a challenge, mostly because the approaches are so different. And that's another place where I'll say early and often is when I like to see students. And there's a number of students, especially with strong engineering backgrounds and less biological sciences backgrounds, who I met with very early on and talked through what their approaches to studying were. My goal whenever I meet with a student is to think about some new things that they can try out, and I ask them to report back to me on how they're working. And through a cycle of communication, we eventually find study strategies that work for the individual and that they feel are helping them learn to the best of their ability. So it's a very normal thing, I think, in any medical school that the beginning is a transition time. But I think especially in our medical school, where some people might come in with very strong engineering backgrounds, and they look at classmates who have very strong biological backgrounds, everyone gets a little bit nervous about whether or not they're prepared. And I think along the curriculum, what you'll see is that each individual has different strengths that they can bring to bear on different topics throughout the curriculum.
Can do the question, this one, report to proctored exam. There's one question here. Can you talk more about how you plan to use data from the proctored exam to help address potential gaps in knowledge across the entire class? Do you anticipate planning for further class-wide sessions to address potential gaps after obtaining more standardized data? I think we could divide this into two halves. I mean, I think after the proctored exam, we will have another set of data, but up till that point, we'll actually have quite a bit of data already from the 5 progress exams and the weekly exams about the gaps in knowledge. So we will be addressing it earlier than the proctored exam. And then we'll get additional data with the proctored exam. But I think what we can do, I think one of the ways we can do this is certainly offering more sessions to address knowledge gaps, just teaching the material, but teaching it possibly in a way where peers teach each other, or we go through practice questions. I think at that stage, practice questions are probably one of the best ways to do that, whether it's through the question bank, targeted feedback through the question bank, or targeted feedback through actual content teaching, high yield content teaching. So we do plan to address the gaps through definitely before the step one course and during the step one course. I think we might have like experts give webinars or sessions on those particular gaps in the curriculum that seem to be arising.
Here's an easy one. Are students involved in the wellness program? And the answer is absolutely yes. We do have our students that are already, I don't know if they're yoga instructors, but they're running the yoga course.
There's one.
I think there's one next week, maybe even tomorrow, that they're doing dancing. Someone wants to teach the class how to do the cha-cha. So yes.
There was a question that asked, you mentioned offering feedback when you notice a student struggling in an area. Can you provide an example of what that feedback or intervention might look like? And as far as the feedback goes, I want to highlight the importance of the weekly feedback that students get and contrast that from some other programs where a student might not really get feedback until the end of a course. When they take a final exam, they take that final exam and then see, oh no, I really didn't know the content. Whereas here, when you get feedback on a weekly basis, you're able to see which topics you might have needed to spend some more time with. Currently, our director of assessment also tags these weekly assessment questions and puts together graphical readouts so you can look for larger trends in areas that you might need more work on, for example. So that's hopefully a snapshot of what that feedback looks like, is connecting the individual questions to these larger topics that can help you make decisions about where to spend your time.
There's another question here. It was mentioned that cases in the curriculum can help prepare for step one. Are the specifics of each of the cases designed to be similar to the exam? So I'm also a medical education facilitator, and I'm facilitating the problem-based learning sessions, which are all case-based. And I think what Dr. Kluta said before, there was a slide about the alignment of the courses with step one. So all the course directors go through and make sure that somewhere in their 5-week course, most of the major topics in the respiratory course, for example, that are in the step one exam are somewhere in those cases. So we do actually try to make the cases align with step one content. Whether they're similar, whether the firecracker questions are USMLE style questions, so they are similar in that sense to the exam. And there are many elements within the case that are going to be topics that are going to be found in exam questions. So I think the answer is yes. We try to design them to be similar to what you would see content-wise and even style-wise on your exam. And in terms of wellness, also we have these innovation pods where there are a lot of wellness activities. So we've had dinners, we've had parties, things like that. So there's monthly activities that are wellness-based. I wanted to add to that in the innovation pods.
Are you planning on incorporating feedback from the first class and adjusting the prep for the second class if needed after the scores come back? Yes.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. Some of the things that I've done with medical students in the past, I almost always run a survey, and even if this class does very well, which has been my experience, is the class meets all of our expectations, we typically poll the students on what resources that they feel that they utilize, and that's one of the legacies that one of the senior classes will leave for future classes, is this information on what they thought help them do well. And then Rob will work with the individuals to say, does this strategy work very well? But yes, in general, we will absolutely take advantage of the information that we learned from the first class to make modifications, not only about step 1 prep, but about the overall curriculum.
And that's something to highlight. Just part of the overall culture here is striving for constant improvement and using data and feedback in order to do that, whether that's at the individual student level or at the entire program level. This question was a little bit more general. Is this something maybe you'd like to touch on, Jaya, with regards to some of the experiences with the PBL groups? The question is, how does the small class size help content learning?
Okay, so it's actually extremely helpful. I think the problem-based learning approach with just 8 students, because they really do teach each other. I find that the students with more engineering background often, will do the calculations on the board, will help each other explain concepts, and the groups are different people have different strengths coming into it, and then they can teach each other. That's the biggest thing that I noticed in terms of content learning. The facilitator got probing questions that guide the students towards learning, but they don't actually give them the answers. So the students provide the answers for each other, but the questions enable them to ask other questions that help them learn. So I think it's actually extremely helpful to have a small class size and the problem-based learning, because they really, if they don't know it, they will learn it, and they'll come back the next session and teach it to each other. And we often go back to previous cases from previous weeks also and relearn material. I don't know if that helps.
I think that also changes the expected relation of students to knowledge. A friend shared an article with me not that long ago that said some kind of estimate that medical knowledge doubles every, 4 or 5 years, something like that, at the pace we're going. So the small class sizes in the PBL format really changes the relation. So it's not only about trying to memorize information, but it's about really being able to find information and utilize that appropriately as a skill.
The other thing is the small class PBL is it's a safe space for learning. So people are not afraid to say they don't know something and learn from each other. It's a good environment for that.
How busy are students currently with PBL, Step 1, studying cases, courses? Do you think it's comparable to or better than other schools' curricula? I can say that our students seem to be behaving and studying about the same amount as any other school that I've worked at. So I think that they are successfully being medical students. Some students commit significant hours to preparing. Others can be a little bit more flexible and can prepare a little bit more efficiently. We are certainly happy to work with the students to try to make the most of their time so that they're studying as efficiently as possible. But within our overall context, my observation has been that our students study about the same amount as students at other schools that I consider our peers.
I want to mention that even though I would say, yes, students are busy, I know students who are involved in research, students who have kept up on their exercise regimens, have kept up on cooking at home, students who transition from a workplace environment, try to keep business hours and really guard their free time as well. So I think that just further illustrates some of the ways that students have found some balance. This is a quick question. We'll see if I'm interpreting it correctly. Someone asked, when during the preparation are questions expected aloud from the students? And something I want to mention is that throughout, I think, there's discussion forums where students post questions and faculty members respond to them. I've been very pleased to see it's in a timely manner, and then the questions are public for all students to benefit from. There's faculty who've held office hours for drop-in sorts of questions, and additional sessions. And so I think the answer to that is that the questions are expected and encouraged throughout the process.
Got them unless you want to.
Yeah, I think that we got the questions that we saw listed. Sorry if we didn't see yours or happened to miss it. If that was the case, please don't hesitate to reach out with an email from our website. You should find no shortage of ways to contact us. We'd all be happy to talk with you further. Any final words?
Thanks for your time.
No, thank you very much.
All right, take care.